So I want to talk about the 1950s protein panic and how it left a residue and how the industry is still doing this massive protein shift, even though the science debunked it. And so I'm just going to talk about how it unfolded and the myths that it created. So in the 1950s, the FAO, the Federal Agriculture Organization, determined that all these people were deficient in protein. So they did this using nitrogen balance research, and they also looked at mostly Western diets that were very meat centric in the 1950s, which is crazy because in the late 1800s, like 1880, 1890, here in the United States, we were actually more plant-based in our diet, and meat was just for special occasions. You had to make once a week, like a roast or Sunday roast, something like that. So they started saying that adults needed this 1.3 to 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. It's still kilograms of body weight. So, they were talking about this, and so the WHO back in like 1965, the World Health Organization joined with FAO, and they did a joint report saying that people in developing countries were lacking protein. There was a protein gap. And so that started the industry, the commercial industry of fortified cereal, fortified bread. You had just a lot of marketing that started, and so that was in 1950s it started, and then in 1971 and 1973 they realized that they overly estimated protein intake, and they realized that it wasn't that people were malnourished in just protein. They were malnourished in calories. So they actually revisited the nitrogen balance, and they realized that was flawed. So in 1973, they lowered the RDA of protein to what it is now, 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. So scientifically, it was squashed. The whole protein panic, deficiency, protein myth was squashed scientifically. But it was already embedded culturally in especially marketing. And so so in the 1950s, they also said, plant protein was not sufficient enough, that they came out with the protein score, scoring the different kinds of protein. And by the 1970s, that was all debunked. So they were like, oh, plant protein is fine if you get a significant amount of calories. If you know how to mix them correctly, you're doing fine. So like I said, scientifically, it was debunked. But it was so embedded culturally, and it's still going on because everything is now with extra protein. You see it on the front of packages, protein, grams of protein, everything like that. So the very interesting part of it for me is that if this came out in another decade, it would not have grabbed hold as it did. It came out in the 1950s. We were still in the Cold War mentality. And so they actually use protein to equal strength and protein to equal really good Americans. So it was really wild that it came out in the 1950s. So if it came out in the 1930s, it would probably just have died down eventually, and people would have just gone on with their lives and not even really thought about protein. And if it happened in the 1970s, probably I would think that in the 1970s we were visiting, being vegetarian, eating more plant-based things. And so I think the whole protein question would only be like discussed in academia, but not like kind of in the real world. So I think that is fascinating. The timing of it is really interesting. So I just want to tell you just analyze it because I just think it's so fascinating, and it's great. It's good to know the history of things that happened that influenced nutrition. And like I said, it's still like, the protein deficiency, protein gap, that's still 70 years later or whatever, it still is front and center, and it should not be. We shouldn't be obsessing over protein again. So I just thought it was a fascinating thing. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye for now.